of course, Justice Jackson's opinion in Youngstown, and he sets forth three different zones. He says, well, in one zone, the president can act in accordance with congressional authority, and that is the easiest for a court to validate, to say, look, Congress and the president are acting together. The president is acting in specific accordance with what Congress has told the president to do. The courts should give real deference to that.
Let me stop you here, because it's the three-pronged test, and we've discussed this in almost every Supreme Court confirmation hearing now. The concern is where there isn't legislation, and or when the third prong, when legislation may say the opposite. Can the president exceed that legislation, and how strong is his authority? You say it's not the commander-in-chief authority, it's the AUMF authority that prevails. Do I understand that correctly?
Yes, essentially what the Solicitor General's office and the Department of Justice has been arguing in these last 2 years is that we're in Zone 1, which is where the executive is acting with Congress's authorization, rather than in Zone 2, where the executive is acting and Congress hasn't said anything, or Zone 3, where the executive is acting as against Congress's statement to the contrary. So those would present very different issues, whether the president has authority to detain where Congress has not said anything, or still yet, whether the president has the authority to detain where Congress has specifically deprived him of that authority. That would be a very different question indeed. Okay. Supreme Court history, who is Robert Jackson. And Robert Jackson was such an executive branch man. He had had a series of positions in the executive branch, including in my role, including as Solicitor General and Attorney General. And he was also, in a way that very few a few, but he was very close personally to Franklin Roosevelt, even before he had occupied this set of positions. They were real friends. And Justice Jackson, he got to the court, and the executive branch never counted on his vote. I mean, quite the opposite, that he was as independent as they come. And the case that everybody knows about, of course, and it's kind of the iconic case, is what he did in Youngstown, where President Truman closes the steel mills and says that this is vital for the national security of the country. And the question comes to the court. And I think for sure President Truman must have thought, oh, well, Robert Jackson will vote with me. And Robert Jackson did nothing of the sort. That Robert Jackson voted against the ability of the executive to take an action like that, and wrote one of I think probably the strongest opinion ever written on the subject of executive power. And so that's the kind of independence that I think a judge has to show, and I think it's sort of a natural consequence of assuming that position.
A professional lifetime to observe the court. What do you think makes a great justice on the court?
I think people are great in many different ways. So I think some justices are great because they have extraordinary wisdom. They have an understanding of how to apply the law in their times in a way that's completely consistent with the text of the law and the purposes of the law, and that's also completely right for the times that judge lives in. And there are some justices, I think, who have had a very strong pragmatic sense of how the law operates in society, and a real wisdom in terms of thinking about the way the law operates in the society of their times. So one justice who comes to mind on that score is Robert Jackson. There are other justices, I think, who are great because of their pens, because they are so eloquent and moving and persuasive when they write about the law. Certainly that was one of the things that made Justice Holmes a great justice.